the weakest person. And they're bullies. Hamas is bullies.
I thank the Justice Department for its honesty. Now, we can put this cruel episode behind us.
We're not building a wall, folks. We're hitting a wall. They need the money, and they need it now.
Tulsi Gabbard is not that leader. This is someone who blamed NATO for the invasion of Ukraine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Elon speaks. Indeed, Elon Musk, standing next to President Trump, was in the Oval Office. There you see the video for his first extensive comments about the Department of Government Efficiency, which he leads, and which he said, with care and compassion, those are his words, care and compassion, $1 trillion in savings can be found within the federal budget and federal deficit reduction. Care and compassion. Well, we'll see. Details yet to emerge on that. Let's hear a little bit of what Elon Musk had to say in the Oval Office.
If there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy. We live in a bureaucracy.
What is the power of bureaucracy? What is the power of a billionaire? That's a big topic. Start tonight with Aaron Navarro on a snowy North Lawn at the White House, and Ed O'Keefe with me right here. Ed, you and I watched Elon Musk with the president. Your takeaways?
Well, the first thing to consider here is these are his first extended remarks since being assigned by President Trump to take on this gargantuan task of revamping and trimming the sails of the federal government. So newsy and important regardless to get him on the record.
Right.
That he brought his son along and was wearing an overcoat and a hat is just, icing on the cake. But he did concede that he's trying, as you said, to cut about $1 trillion. Conceded that sometimes some of his public statements are going to be incorrect and he deserves to be corrected. Said that he appreciates that there are detractors, but that the American public, and the president said this as well, have voted for this kind of radical change, and so they're trying to implement it. And notably, the president said that when there are court orders from judges to try to slow or stop some of the early bold moves they've tried to make, he will comply with them, even if he will appeal them vigorously.
And Elon Musk said, look, if anyone thinks there's a conflict of interest, they will call me out on it.
Yep.
And the president said, if we think there's a conflict of interest, we will stop him. That's basically asking the American public to rely on the good offices of the President of the United States and the man he quite clearly trusts to decide what or whether there's a conflict of interest, Elon Musk.
And remember, our polling from Sunday suggests that there is some concern that perhaps he has too much influence, at least among a plurality of Americans. And so the fact that the president's saying, again, we'll be on the lookout for this, may not go over well with a lot of skeptics who wonder, should a billionaire, the richest man in the world, have this much power over the federal government spending?
And in the show open, we saw a piece of sound from New York City Mayor Eric Adams. I'll come back to you on that momentarily. I want to get to the North Lawn and Aaron Navarro. Aaron, from your vantage point, that was an unexpected appearance for Elon Musk, probably sending reverberations throughout the press room there this afternoon.
Yeah, it's not only a clear visual that Elon Musk and President Trump are in lockstep, but also on paper, the White House said that President Trump signed an executive order that essentially emboldens the mission of the government or the Department of Government Efficiency, known as DOGE, to really make these cuts. The executive order that Trump signed tells federal agency heads to work with DOGE when it comes to large-scale reductions in force. It says that they need to limit any hiring to just, quote, essential positions only, and said that agencies can determine if they need to combine certain departments or eliminate them if they, quote, are not functions required by law. I also thought it was notable how Elon Musk talked a lot and was asked about transparency regarding DOGE. Everything that we here at CBS News have been hearing from government employees in USAID and CFPB, these agencies that DOGE has really sunk their teeth into to try and dismantle, has been a lot of confusion from these workers at the federal level on what happens next. I thought that comment about being transparent from Elon Musk was interesting.
Well, to your point, Aaron, Elon Musk said, well, we post all of our actions on X or our website. But that doesn't explain how it actually lands with the employees in these various agencies or what legal authority they have to take some of the actions that they're trying to put in motion.
That's right. And Trump was asked about if he believes Congress, if their role in this in terms of enshrining the cuts that DOGE has made is necessary. Trump seemed to kind of brush it off, but said that he believes the vote would be there should it get to Congress.
And I want to ask you about Eric Adams, the New York City mayor, an important decision basically that came from Main Justice to the Southern District of New York.
Telling the Southern District of New York,
prosecutors there,
which has prosecuted some of the biggest high-profile cases, certainly in the city there, to back off, in essence. But leaves open the possibility that should the mayor lose the primary for mayor in the city later this year, that the case could conceivably be reopened. In essence, they're hanging this over his head now. If you go along to get along with us, we'll back off. But if you lose, or should there be some reason that we think you should be prosecuted again, we might reopen the case or at least keep going with the case.
So just to be clear, for those who might see a headline suggesting these charges are dropped.
Not entirely.
They're held in abeyance, essentially.
Essentially. They're kind of holding
with a kind of political implication also hanging over them.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, the mayor, let's remember, is facing a crowded, contested primary from a handful of Democrats who believe they'd do a better job than he would after the last 4 years, and after revelations in this case about was he allegedly taking bribes, essentially, from Turkish officials to get some construction projects done in the city. That plus concerns about crime and whether he is being too sympathetic to the Trump administration or reasons why he's being challenged. And now they're saying, well, we'll hold off so long as you consider our immigration policy and work with us on this. In a city that has for so long stood as a sanctuary city or safe for immigrants, he now, after several years of frustration with the Biden administration, is quite open to working with the Trump officials on curtailing immigration, sending them back if need be, and taking other steps to make sure it doesn't become a city that gets overrun by people coming from other countries.
Aaron, it was a very big event just a couple of hours ago at the Trump White House. Things tend to move in very rapid fashion. The King of Jordan, King Abdullah II, was there, sitting with the president. The president was very expansive in his comments about his aspirations for Gaza and redevelopment there. The Jordanian king nodding, being polite but non-committal.
That's right. President Trump, again, maybe a bit ambitious about his plan to, quote, own the Gaza Strip, said when asked that the U.S. would not, quote, buy Gaza, but would, quote, take it. Asked what authority he has to do that, Trump said, quote, under the U.S. authority. But he also predicted, again, progress with Jordan and Egypt in terms of accepting displaced Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. King Abdullah talked about accepting 2,000 children with cancer or other illnesses into Jordan. But it was really interesting what he posted on X after the meeting with Trump, where he reiterated that they want a plan to help rebuild Gaza without displacing any Palestinians. So certainly at odds there. We heard King Abdullah also kind of punt to Egypt and say that there are discussions there. It seems like there's some sort of coordination when it comes to Arab nations and regarding to how to respond, maybe give Trump a counteroffer, but certainly an interesting reaction from King Abdullah after the meeting with Trump.
And to pick up on Aaron's point, a counteroffer. Look, there is no U.S. authority to take control of Gaza. It doesn't exist. It may be a fanciful notion the president have, but saying it out loud doesn't make it so.
Right. And the fact that the king now has said, I'll take about 2,000 Palestinian kids who are in need of medical care.
Worth pointing out, Jordan has already taken several millions of Palestinian refugees over many years.
And from Syria as well over the course of its strife in recent years. So the king and that goodwill gesture taking a few thousand Palestinian kids may be designed to sort of have the president ease off a bit and say, hey, let me at least do that for you now. You sort out with the Israelis what the next step is. That's what he's been doing with all these cases. Panama Canal, Greenland, Canada, now the Mideast. He says something outlandish. He shakes the world. That other element gives something in return, and maybe he starts to back off. But it inches him closer to the goals he has. End the war in Gaza. Stop Russian dominance of the Arctic. Get the Canadians to give us a better deal on steel. Get the Panamanians to stop the Chinese from developing the canal. If you inch closer to all that by saying outlandish things, ultimately he's getting what he wants.
One thing in the outlandish category that might not be that peaceable in the Middle East is a suggestion, again repeated with the Jordanian king sitting right next to him in the Oval Office. If all hostages are not released by noon this Saturday, all hell will break loose, or something to that effect.
And Netanyahu reiterated it today, so now we have a new problem to watch for in the Middle East.
Very good. Ed O'Keefe, Here with me at the desk, Aaron Navarro, Snorri North Lawn of the White House. Thank you very, very much. Is Tulsi Gabbard's confirmation to serve as Director of National Intelligence a sure thing? Didn't seem like it. Now it does. Next, we'll take you to Capitol Hill, where they have a very late vote on that question tonight. Welcome back. The Senate is expected to vote on and, in all likelihood, confirm Tulsi Gabbard to serve as President Trump's Director of National Intelligence. Former Democratic Congresswoman turned Trump supporter had been considered somewhat in jeopardy, but Republican dissent, to whatever degree it manifested, basically has disappeared in recent days. Our Nicole Killian is on Capitol Hill with more. Nicole, what's the timing of this, and does it appear anything will stand in Gabbard's way to being confirmed?
It doesn't appear that way, Major, and we're expecting that vote to occur sometime overnight. But look, largely the path was cleared for Tulsi Gabbard coming out of committee. Of course, there was a hearing that she had before the Senate Intelligence Committee where she was pressed by lawmakers on both sides about her views on government surveillance, on whether or not she believes former NSA leaker Edward Snowden was a traitor, to her visit to Syria, her views on the war between Russia and Ukraine. And, you know, she got a lot of pushback, really, from both sides of the aisle there. But after that hearing, contentious as it may have been, we did see a number of Republican senators, particularly on that committee, start to come out in support of her. One notable one, of course, Susan Collins, who had some additional conversations with Gabbard and felt that after that, she felt a little more comfortable with her views with respect to the intelligence community. And we saw kind of more of a drip of Republican lawmakers, you know, kind of soften their stances and positions towards Gabbard. So that being said, she was able to advance out of committee. And of course, now we have this period on the Senate floor where there's a period of debate allowed up to 30 hours. So kind of at the completion of that period is when we expect that vote to happen.
And Nicole, what's the latest read on Kash Patel to head the FBI?
Well, he is expected to also have a vote out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There was supposed to be a vote last week, or, you know, the committee tried to vote him out of committee, but Democrats objected. They said that they wanted more information and really ideally wanted a second hearing to kind of flesh out Kash Patel's positions. Also, we heard earlier today from the Senate Judiciary Ranking Member Dick Durbin, who alleged that Kash Patel may have been directing some of the firings and some of the staff turnover that we have seen at the FBI. So that being said, many Democrats have a number of concerns. However, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, has made clear that no matter how long this is stalled or plays out, he still believes that Patel will have the vote. So it's really, in his view, kind of just a matter of time before his nomination eventually advances.
And Nicole, on the ongoing conversations between Republicans in the Senate and Republicans in the House on how best, from their vantage point, to proceed legislatively on the Trump tax cuts, where do things stand this afternoon?
Well, the short answer is it's complicated. We do know late today that Senate Majority Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson are meeting on this reconciliation process. And as you know, Major, both chambers are kind of proceeding in different fashions in terms of a budget resolution, which they first have to assemble to try to use as a vehicle for the president's legislative agenda. So over in the Senate, Senate Republicans heard today from the president's border czar, Tom Homan, also Russ Vought, who is the newly confirmed director of the Office of Management and Budget, and what Senator Lindsey Graham said, who constructed this budget resolution on the Senate side, said the message coming out of that meeting was we need money. And so that is why Graham wanted to move forward with a resolution to try to advance the president's agenda, specifically with respect to border security, energy independence, some defense, but really to try to get the president the money he needs to kind of beef things up at the border. The House, on the other hand, though, they kind of want to go after this big, beautiful bill strategy in terms of not only including those border security and energy components, but also potentially extending the president's tax cuts and even potentially including the debt limit in that. So the speaker has made clear that they hope to have that the outlines of that resolution as soon as tonight, certainly before the end of the week, because they would like to start marking that measure up.
But just to remind our audience, Nicole, we have heard statements like that before in the last week or so. Well, we'll be done tonight. We'll be done tomorrow night. And those deadlines, self-imposed, keep slipping.
Exactly, but they do feel that they can get something out before the end of the week, or that is certainly their goal, especially since Congress will be recessing at the end of the week for the President's Day recess. So it is pretty essential for them to try to get something to paper. Otherwise, they risk potentially losing momentum, especially to the Senate, which is already getting ready to mark up their budget resolution starting tomorrow.
Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill, thank you very much.
You bet.
American school teacher Mark Fogel will be back on U.S. soil tonight. This is a picture shared on social media by United States envoy for hostages Adam Bowler. Fogel was released from a Russian penal colony. In 2021, he was returning to Moscow, where he was teaching, carrying a small amount of medical marijuana prescribed to him in the U.S. Fogel was arrested and then sentenced to 14 years in prison. The United States government designated him as wrongfully detained. The president's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, said this move was a sign of good faith from the Russian government. Trump administration efforts to cut medical research funding are on hold, at least for now. Next, what areas are being targeted and where the legal fight brought by 22 states now stands. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. A federal judge has blocked the Trump administration's attempt to cut medical research grants in 22 states. These 22 states banded together and filed a lawsuit. In a statement announcing that legal action, Massachusetts Attorney General said in part, quote, "We will not allow the Trump administration to unlawfully," that's a really important word, "unlawfully undermine our economy, hamstring our competitiveness, or play politics with our public health." I want to bring in a really smart guy who knows all about this, Alex Tin. Great to have you with us. Thanks for being at the table. How much money are we talking about, and what are the legal contours of this fight?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to understate how much money we're talking about. We're talking about literally every research dollar that the NIH puts out to thousands of medical colleges, institutions, hospitals, nonprofits, you name it. Every one of those dollars is now tagged by this lawsuit, which is targeting something called indirect costs. What that means is, you know, if you and I, Major, were scientists sitting doing some experiments with viruses, the direct cost would be the cost of, you know, obtaining the stuff specific to that virus experiment. The indirect costs are the building that we're running it in, the equipment that we're using that's being used not just for that experiment, but other experiments. What the Trump administration has tried to do, they've tried it before in the first term, and they tried it now successfully, at least until they got blocked by the courts, was to dramatically cut the amount of money that the NIH would pay for these indirect costs. Now, it's important to remember, you know, you mentioned it at the beginning, the argument we've heard from states and from medical colleges who sued to stop this action is that they think it's unlawful. That's for a number of reasons, but the two big ones to focus on here are, first, back in 2017, Congress actually added something to a budget bill saying that the NIH effectively can't do this. That's being challenged now. The second part is because these are grants that have been negotiated already. You know, we're talking about research that universities and hospitals have already gone through a long process to determine that indirect cost they will be paid for. All of those negotiations were thrown out of the window.
And Alex, as I understand it, this question about federal allocations for indirect costs is not either new or irrelevant. It's an important part of the conversation. Congress has weighed in on it. As you said, the Trump administration tried to cap them at a lower level the first time around. It is a legitimate issue. But I guess what the legal challenge is, if you want to take up that legitimate issue, do it prospectively, not retroactively.
That's right. And, you know, you've heard this argument from both hospitals, universities, the states, that the proper place to essentially wage this argument would have been in Congress, the same place that they first waged this argument back in 2017. And the culmination of that 2017 process was Congress adding to the budget bill a clause that said effectively, you can't change these indirect costs. But of course, there are questions. There are real questions, not only about whether that budget clause, the way that it was worded, actually does block the NIH from doing that. That's number one. But number two, and this could be the maybe side benefit for the people who first put forward this action, is that even if they do end up getting blocked by the courts, It's clear that this topic, this discussion is now back at the forefront, and there is now clearly some support for not only pushing for reducing these costs, but obviously pushing senators who initially were opposing these cuts to potentially now favor them.
All right, so taking it out of the realm of dry clauses in 2017 budget bills, but to actual human beings who may benefit or who may be jeopardized from the benefits of federal research, what are we talking about there? How to humanize this?
Yeah, I mean, you heard it from the universities who first brought this lawsuit. I mean, there is ongoing research happening right now for everything from cancer, diabetes. There's people getting experimental treatments right now in children's hospitals. All of that research is potentially affected if you make this dramatic cut to these indirect costs. What that means is that if you're a children's hospital, especially if you're a clinic that doesn't have a whole lot of extra money for that research could be paused, it could be suspended, it could be cut back because you just don't have the money anymore that you thought you did from that initial discussion with HHS where they said, oh, we'll pay for this person you need to meet XYZ regulation. That money isn't there anymore, at least if this order is upheld.
And to put that in practical terms, I'm a small hospital or clinic or a mid-sized clinic or hospital. I have a budget for all this sort of stuff. I assume these costs are covered. If they're suddenly not, or I'm warned that they might not be, I've got to recalibrate everything.
Yeah, and
patients may suffer.
Exactly, and it's important to remind people that, it's not like if we were running a hospital, we can't just go to HHS and NIH and say, here's the amount of indirect costs we want paid for, give us the farm. We talked with former federal health officials who work in the office that's responsible for overseeing these costs. I mean, they do extensive inspections.
They scrub the books.
Exactly. They scrub the books. They go on site. They walk around these labs and say, what are you using this equipment for? Do you really need this person? Is this person really contributing to the research that you've applied for funding for? And as a result of that interrogation, as a result of those inspections, there's a very contentious negotiation process, sometimes lasting weeks or months between universities and HHS. And as a result of that, they come to an agreement on how much to pay for these indirect costs. And
so,
all of that is thrown out of the window.
Quickly, Alex, right now with this judicial intervention, is the money still going out?
Well, supposedly it is. And, that's at least for the next few weeks until we get a court hearing on February 21st.
To try to resolve it all.
That's right. But what we've heard from the groups is that there are still questions of whether NIH will actually follow that order. There hasn't been guidance clearly one way or the other, so stay tuned on that.
I told you he was really smart. Alex Tin, thank you for that very, very much. So, will Vice President J.D. Vance be the one to take over or inherit the MAGA mantle? Well, President Trump put some things on the record today that were kind of interesting in that regard. Our reporter panel will take a look at that when we come back. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Fact, it is way too early to talk about the 2028 presidential campaign. However, President Trump kind of peeled back some of his thinking, whether it's in front of the curtain or behind the curtain, in the Fox Super Bowl interview when asked about his vice president, J.D. Vance's political future. Listen.
Do you view Vice President J.D. Vance as your successor, the Republican nominee in 2028?
No, but he's very capable. I mean, I don't think that I think you have a lot of very capable people. So far, I think he's doing a fantastic job. It's too early.
Deepa Shivaran and Leanne Caldwell join us now. Deep is a White House correspondent for NPR. Leanne, Chief Washington correspondent at Puck News. I'm a subscriber and pleased to say that. All right, let's chew over this very quickly. Leanne, so is it too early because the president keeps listening to House Republicans who say he can have a third term, a consecutive second term?
Well, he did joke the other day.
I'm not sure it's a joke, kids.
We don't know. We will see if it's a joke. Yeah. There's a lot of capable people, including Donald Trump, to run in 2028. But look, we know that Donald Trump tests loyalty, and loyalty is one-way street and incredibly important to him. We saw what happened to his last vice president, Mike Pence.
Yep.
And so I think that maybe Donald Trump is not wanting to endorse with only 21 days into his term.
Right, and was quick to just say no, period.
No, period, yeah.
No was the full sentence there, and just completely jumped to saying, well, there's a lot of other options, too.
In part because by creating that atmosphere of aspiration, Trump is signaling to other Republicans, your loyalty to me will be a litmus test in this conversation.
It's currency. I mean, to Leanne's point, it's fully currency to him. And again, to Leanne's point as well,
commoditizing political loyalty.
Early in this administration, and he's got a long runway here to gain some of that currency with some members of Congress, with some that he, maybe hasn't worked with in the past, or ones that he's wanting to build up that relationship with. They obviously have a majority in the House and in the Senate, but with Trump, he really sees it as part of his political game.
And Leanne, you are with Puck. You have written a very toothy piece, if you will. That's a compliment.
Thank you.
About what Mitch McConnell may or may not do. Now, there is a sort of implication that he will oppose certain Trump nominees, but he's in no position to sink them. It doesn't look like any of them are going to be denied confirmation. What is his real role in these next couple of months as a backbencher with influence?
Yeah, backbencher with influence. He no longer has to what he calls the spear catcher for his conference. He does not have to, listen or take into consideration what his members think. So what he is trying to do is he has put himself in charge of defense appropriations, defense spending, and he is trying to ensure that the isolationist movement of the Trump Republican Party does not succeed. And so he wants to not only maintain a strong defense, but expand a strong United States military. And he is going to do everything in his power to do that. And that's a reason why he did not vote for Pete Hegseth as nominee, not only because it had nothing to do with all the alleged personal digressions. No.
Thin resume.
Right. Thin resume. He did not think that he was qualified to lead a massive department at a critical time in this country, and he also didn't support his isolationist ideology either.
So, Deepa, on this larger question of the White House's orientation to the House and the Senate, as I gather it from a slight distance, House and Senate Republicans keep asking the president, please tell us what you want us to do. And he keeps saying, figure it out yourselves, gentlemen, gentle ladies, and they're still having a hard time figuring that part out.
It does feel like they're kind of moving in circles a little bit. Like there is like a dog chasing the tail kind of a situation. And then the president, will make it really, clear to him what he wants, but that's not exactly translating, I guess, across Pennsylvania Avenue. And the list is long, but also very specific, right? He talks a lot about wanting to, focus on the border. Things like that have been top of mind, especially if you're, working at the White House and you end up in the Oval Office at one of these longer Q&A sessions that the president holds. It could be about any given topic, and he'll bring it back to that. So there's a long list and an expensive one at that.
And Leanne, in essence, what the president wants is whatever gets the requisite votes, however you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. He doesn't care how it is done at all. He does not care about boundaries and requirements or whatever. But yeah, Speaker Johnson wants Donald Trump to come in and tell everyone how it's going to be. Right,
say,
exactly.
Do this and do it this way.
And he's not going to do it right now anyway. He does not care how it gets done.
It seems to me that Speaker Johnson keeps articulating that, though, in a very quiet voice. If you don't do it, Mr. President, I can't be your hammer, so I can't find the votes I need to move your agenda forward. So put the hammer down, give it to me. Right. And the president's like, Mike, have you figured it out yet?
No, that's for sure. And I think the president is one who wants to assign that task out, right, and just kind of have it get done. And clearly hasn't really moved the needle on that quite yet.
Deepa Shivaram, Leanne Caldwell, always a pleasure. Thanks for being here. Trump administration is facing more than 50 lawsuits on what can only be described as a range of issues. Question, will the president listen to court rulings? Today in the Oval Office, he said he probably will. But we want to talk to a law professor about whether or not that will stick and what happens if it doesn't. That's next. You're watching America Decides.
Fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people. And when the courts, because you will get taken to court, and then when the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it.
That was then Senate candidate J.D. Vance in 2021 with advice for a future Trump administration. You could interpret it one way as saying, well, ignore what the federal courts say. Now, Vice President Vance and his boss, in ways that might be alarming, have suggested that they may or may not follow exactly what federal judges say about actions taken in Trump 2.0. I want to have a conversation about this with Professor of Law and Public Policy at the University of Michigan, Samuel Bagnestos. He joins us now. Samuel, it's great to have you with us. That's an apocryphal story, by the way. Andrew Jackson didn't exactly say those very words, but it's taken on a kind of larger-than-life status within the Trump universe. The larger question is, do you see things undertaken in the first stages of the second Trump administration that you find legally alarming?
Well, sure. I think there's a lot that's legally alarming. We have a consistent pattern of this administration, and particularly in the efforts of Elon Musk, rooting through agency after agency, of disregarding very clear statutes that Congress has passed to tell them what to do. They basically say they don't like the laws Congress has passed, so they're not going to follow them. They don't like having a USAID agency, which Congress created, so they're going to disestablish it themselves. They don't like spending Congress has adopted through law, so they're not going to spend it. You know, they don't like various restrictions on the civil service, so they're not going to follow them. I think that's very alarming. I think it's alarming that the administration has taken such an aggressive approach to firing all of the people within the government who could impose significant checks, like firing over a dozen inspectors general without following the procedure required by the statute to provide a reason to Congress and provide a waiting period so that Congress can respond. You know, these mass reassignments and some firings within the Department of Justice, the suggestion of mass firings within the FBI, all of people who were involved in investigating Trump-related and January 6th related activity. You know, it's all part and parcel of a pattern of saying we do not believe we are bound by law. Now, the courts will have something to say about that and have had something to say about that over the past few days. You've seen order after order issued by courts telling them to stop. And, you know, they have the Trump administration has not said they're going to defy any of these orders. You know, there's all this sort of chatter and noise, but, you know, I think when the rubber meets the road, they have not said they're going to defy these orders. And if they did, I think that would be both extremely troubling and something that the courts would have to step up their response to, and Congress would have to step up its response to.
What the president said was, I will summarize briefly, is that if there are court orders, they will follow them, but he doesn't understand why courts would intervene in certain areas. That's an essential summary of it, Professor. Does that trouble you?
Well, you know, I think if what he's saying is he might criticize certain court orders, you know, that's certainly his prerogative to do. You know, he might appeal certain court orders, which they have done, the Trump administration already. Again, that's the ordinary legal process. But they're trying to have it both ways, you know, to make people think that they're not going to follow court orders, to kind of send this message that they're, you know, striding across the world unchecked. At the same time, they're really not saying they're not going to comply with these orders. And, you know, let's see what happens when the rubber meets the road.
And is there a fear that you have that the way the public in general, and I'm oversimplifying here, is digesting this? It's like, well, the president's taken on a big bureaucracy, and I'm generally in favor of that, and the stakes can't be too high, and it's high time that somebody really looks under the hood and digs into all this, and if he has to push up against some legal guardrails, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I am not a political expert. I am a lawyer. But what I can say is this. I mean, if you look at some of the things they've done, for example, this really irresponsible and precipitous order that NIH issued late on Friday night, dramatically cutting the amount of funding that goes to hospitals and to institutions of research around the country, you know, that's not a red state or a blue state issue. That's something that people everywhere in the country rely on. If they find that the hospital that they want to go to is closing because Donald Trump blew a hole in that hospital's budget overnight, in a way that violated the law, I think people are going to be upset. And I think you've seen that, in the response to that particular action, where you had people like Senator Katie Britt of Alabama, certainly not a liberal, I mean, a conservative Republican, opposing that. You've seen the appropriations chair in the Senate, Susan Collins, saying that is a deeply troubling thing. And remember, that was something the Trump administration tried to do their first time in office, and Congress, under Republican control at the time, passed a law telling them they could not do it. And I think, that gets to it. It all sounds very good in the abstract to say I'm taking on the bureaucracy. But, the bureaucracy is not an abstract thing. It's something that provides benefits that people really rely on day after day in their lives, again, in red states and in blue states.
A conversation we hope to continue with you. Samuel Bagnestos, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Cook Political Report is already spotlighting toss-up races to look out for in 2026. Not too early for that, I promise you. Next, the ones that could determine the balance of power in the House of Representatives. That's next. You know what you're doing. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. You stayed all the way to the end. Thank you. You're not thinking about the House races in 2026, nor should you be, but here's a fact. House members are, and people who want to join the House of Representatives are. And that means planning, preparations, analysis already underway. The nonpartisan Cook Political Report has quite helpfully put out a new list of 18 potential toss-up races that could very much inform us about the next majority in the House of Representatives. For more on this, I want to bring in Erin Covey for analysis. She leads the Cook Political Report's coverage of the House. It's great to have you with us. So, too early for lots of people, but not too early for us to have this conversation, and most especially, not too early for the members of the House and those who would like to become future members of the House. So what 18 races has the Cook Political Report looked at and said, hey, these are ones to keep an eye on, and why?
So it's never too early for us, and off years don't really exist anymore.
Right.
So we are always on, and we have released our House and Senate and governor's race ratings now. Now, obviously, we have over 600 days until the midterms. Right. So environmentally, we don't know what that's going to look like, and a lot could change. But right now, it looks like the battleground of competitive House races is relatively small. So Democrats would only need to pick up 3 seats on net to take control of the House next year. So theoretically, that should be a very doable opportunity for them. But the battleground itself is relatively evenly divided. We have 18 true toss-up races, in total about 39 competitive races. And between those 18 toss-up races, we have 10 held by Democrats and 8 held by Republicans. Many of the Democrats in these toss-up seats are folks that we know and have heard of before: Jared Golden in Maine, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez in Washington, Marcy Kaptur in Ohio. These are all seats that Trump has carried previously. So they are going to have to win over a significant number of Trump voters to win re-election next year.
And is there anything thematic about these toss-up House races?
It's hard to put a theme to it. They're geographically very diverse, spread out all over the map, as the map just showed, yeah. All around the map. Some of these are in presidential battleground states. We have some competitive seats in Pennsylvania and Arizona that are often competitive, but we also have seats in California and New York. And so it is pretty diverse geographically, diverse racially too. I think the main thing drawing all of these seats together is, in most of these cases, we have members who are going to have to reach out to voters who may have voted differently last year.
And very quickly, you have some updated Senate analysis, Michigan and Georgia, toss-ups.
Yes, so the Senate is much harder for Democrats. Currently, we have only 5 Senate seats that are rated as competitive. That's New Hampshire and Georgia and Michigan, which are held by Democrats, North Carolina and Maine, which are held by Republicans. So even if Democrats hold the 3 seats that are competitive and flip the 2 Republican-held seats, they're still 2 seats short of a majority. So we're not really expecting Democrats to take back the majority next year, but of course it is very early, and other states could join the map later on.
And Jon Ossoff was a big winner. Now he's in a toss-up category. Is that a race to keep a very close eye on?
Absolutely. I think he's probably the most vulnerable senator from both parties.
From either party.
Right now. And he will be facing re-election in an environment that should be better for Democrats, but it is going to be a difficult state. This is a state that Trump carried last year, and so he's also going to have to win over Trump voters to win re-election.
Aaron Covey, please come back. I appreciate the time and the expertise. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report, that starts right now.